Well, Jimmy Nelson is warming up out on the mound. Earlier today, as we mentioned before, the Phillies introduced Andy MacPhail as their new president, as effective at the end of this year. Let's hear from John Middleton, one of the Phillies owners, introducing him.
The three of us went out and started talking to people in Major League Baseball to solicit names. What surprised us was that every single person, without exception, listed Andy MacPhail as number one. There was nobody else who was number one on any other person's list.
Well, and speaking of Andy MacPhail, he's been nice enough to join us up here in the booth. Well, that was a very nice thing that John Middleton said today when talking about his discussions with other folks about you.
It sure was. Had I known that, I would have bargained a little harder. I had no idea.
Well, we're happy to have you here in Philadelphia. I know you must be excited to get started and get back into baseball after being out of the game for the last 3 years.
That's right, and it's amazing how much I don't know. When you've been away 3 years, you got to assume the game has changed twofold since you've been away. So it's probably a good thing to watch, read and listen and try to get up to speed and not make any assumptions about information that you may have known a while ago.
I thought that was interesting when you said that today, Andy, that the game has changed twofold since you've been out. I mean, there is some truth to that this game is ever evolving, and it seems to be moving even faster in this era.
Yeah, almost exponentially. And I'll give you the biggest example is just your entry of amateur talent into your system is really a completely different system than it was just 3 years ago.
Well, Cameron Rupp will lead things off here at the bottom of the second, and it's 1 ball and no strikes to Cameron Rupp.
Well, Andy, nice seeing you again. It's been a few years.
It sure has.
Congratulations.
Nice to see some of our former players here. I got a couple texts that they all weren't complimentary either.
Well, for me, I think your thought, what you think about that. I know you've answered 1,000 questions about the sabermetrics, where you stand on and where do you go from here on that?
Well, I'm just a huge believer in looking at everything. I don't know why you would exclude anything. I'm not a slave to any one particular thing, but I want to collect as much information as I can, both on the analytic side, but also on the human intelligence side. Because as you know, Matt, bodies change, weaknesses get exposed and exploited. Certain players make adjustments. You got to really look at everything, marry the two together, and hope that when you look at them all, they're telling you the same story.
Well, I think it's partly what you said today, too, Andy, that even if you don't 100% believe in all of it, your opponent does. So why do they believe in it? And if they do, let me find out why, and that will give us an advantage moving forward. Absolutely.
If it would help you discern how they evaluate your players or what they hold to be important, which you may not put as much emphasis on, they do, that would help you in the transaction as well. So to me, I mean, we've always been doing it wherever
Absolutely.
I've been, and it always gets more progressively more sophisticated, and you just got to keep up with the times.
2 balls and 2 strikes to Cameron Rupp here in the bottom of the second, and Rupp chops one foul past the third base bag. We mentioned that you've been out of the game for the last 3 years. How excited are you to be back in the game?
It's, I know I'm not much on dilettantism. When you're in, you got to be all the way in.
Yeah.
You can't just dip your toe in, and so you've got to completely immerse yourself in this. So I know that I'm glad I took the 3 years off and did what we did. I get that out of my system, and now you just got to throw yourself in the deep end of the pool and go.
What'd you learn during those 3 years?
Well, I think, we traveled all around the world, and, you start to feel sorry for yourself, but you get out in the world and look around and see how other people are living, whether it be in Vietnam or China or Thailand. You get a little bit of an awakening, and it was kind of it was an eye-opener for me and really a life changer in a lot of respects.
Cameron fouls another one off the third base line. It remains 3 balls and 2 strikes.
Well, it must feel nice sitting there today and John Middleton saying, hey, you got support from the ownership. We're not putting a number on what you need. You let us know, and we'll go forward. It must be nice to have that support the ownership's in the show.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Nice. Generally, which is totally appropriate, you have some restraints, particularly when you're working out of places like Minnesota. But, that was great to hear.
This will be a 6-3 putout. Cameron Rupp is retired after a long at-bat. Andy, what of those places and the success you had in Minnesota, Chicago, and then eventually in Baltimore, what have they taught you leading up to this point?
Well, I think you continue to evolve. I mean, most people don't really know what to make of my time in Chicago. They're used to evaluating you as a general manager, where it's an easier thing to do, the trades and the wins and losses. When in fact I was only a GM there for 1.5 of the 12 years, and it was a different type of role. which was great because I got exposed to both sides of the business. I got exposed to issues at the ownership level, being part of a collective bargaining agreement in 2002, 2006. So that was a well-rounding experience.
Freddie Galvis, the batter for the Phils, and the count is 1-1 to Freddie.
Just think how much fun we had back in 2001, though.
I'm going to tell you in front of your audience here that I've never seen a guy hit more good balls into the wind and Wrigley Field than you did. Every time you got one, the wind was howling in off the lake.
That's what you call not a very smart hitter.
Matt doesn't know this also, but I made a trade with Billy Beane to get Matt, and I gave up a right to a draft pick or to a waiver claim, which was against the rules, and I got fined. I got personally fined $5,000 by the commissioner's office because of you.
So you're that important.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't bring better numbers. But we did come in third. We were over 500. It was a good time. It was a fun time.
Yeah. Well, we had 2 postseason appearances in my 12 years, but when you consider it took them 48 years to get 2 before me, it wasn't too bad. Plus, by the time our last 4 years, we were drawing over 3 million. So, as a president, we were doing fine. I think their highest attendance had been 2.6 prior to that.
Well, and I'll ask you about that because this is such a beautiful ballpark. We've had so much success in this ballpark. What are your thoughts even looking at this right now? I mean, your last stop was Baltimore, which is a great place, Camden Yards. But what are your thoughts looking at
this is gorgeous. The sight lines of this ballpark are outstanding. The options for your fans are plentiful. It's a prettier park than I remember. I came in here a few years ago with Baltimore, and you get so zoned in on the game, but it is really a gorgeous park with great, what a great, I don't remember the skyline quite like that.
Yeah, on a clear night, I mean, it's beautiful to take a glimpse out at Center City. Sean O'Sullivan's the batter with 1 man down. Now, folks probably watch the press conference today. They understand that you're going to basically consume yourself with everything about the organization for the next several months before taking over officially once the season comes to a close. As Sean O'Sullivan sends one in the air to center field, it's deep and it is off the base of the wall. Galvis around second, heading to third, and he'll get there. And O'Sullivan standing at second with his first extra base hit of the year. Andy, that's a guy who was a third baseman in college who loves to hit, and showed off a little sweet swing right there.
You could hear that one from up there. Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
Well, he got a fastball up in the zone. He drove it. I would like to see Freddie Galvis get a little farther closer to second base. The rule of thought is once you see the outfielders turning and run, then you start going around the base because you have time to come back to first base. But second, third, top of the order.
Yeah, with Ben Revere coming up. And Revere, who doubled his last time up. Second career double for O'Sullivan. So I was saying that for the next 3 months, you'll sort of consume yourself with each facet of the organization.
Yeah, I've got a lot. There's a lot for me to try to assimilate in that time. And, to me, the chief things are going to be to watch, listen, and do a lot of reading. Get an opportunity to get out and see the affiliates and the environments that they play in, and start to put some faces to the names that you've been reading about.
1 ball and no strikes to Ben Revere. Well, and this game has been part of your life, your family's life, for your entire life. I mean, what does it mean? What does the game mean to you? With your grandfather, with your father, and even other members of your family that are part of the game of baseball.
Yeah, we've got 4 generations. Both my boys work in baseball. One is interning for the Cincinnati Reds, and the other is working for Major League Baseball in their labor relations department. And of course my grandfather and father and myself, so that's 4 generations. We really haven't been able to find honest work anywhere else. So
it's a great game.
Yeah, take the path of least resistance.
Well, Revere stands in with the count, no balls and 2 strikes. The Brewers play the infield in here in the bottom of the second as the runners take their lead. Revere had 2 strikes his last time up, and he takes up and in. It's 1 ball and 2 strikes. You mentioned during the press conference today that you went into Baltimore during basically the same time of year when you took over. Will that help in your assessments for the next several months?
Absolutely. And one of the things I mentioned is I ended up doing things very differently than I might have guessed at that point in time.
Off the leg of Nelson. They'll get Revere at first, but a run scores. It's 3-1. What were some of the things that were a little different when you were down in Baltimore?
Well, I never dreamed that I was going to end up trading our best pitcher in that offseason. That certainly wasn't part of the mind going, the state of mind going in. And that's the same approach you have to take here. You really have to be open-minded. We all have opinions, but you want to make sure they're grounded in some fact. So you need to take the time to understand maybe the changes in the game and how that influences the evaluation of different players. For example, I've read a lot about young position players being valued more highly than they were even 3 years ago, with the offense sort of off than what it was a little bit ago. So it's important to get a sense of some of those changes and how they might impact how other clubs evaluate their players and what they'd be willing to part with. And those are all things that it's best not to make any assumptions. Just go in and do the work and try to learn these things for yourself.
And I know you've known Pat for a long time. As Hernandez loops that one to left center field, that's going to drop for a base hit. O'Sullivan's going to head home. The throw to the plate is not in time. Hernandez to second. It's 4-1. Phillies on top. Andy, it's an awakening offensively for the Phillies.
I do remember one thing. It's best to come in when your team is hitting. If it's a long inning, it's good. And if they're not doing well, you're out of here in a couple minutes. This is okay. It's better than the alternative.
Sullivan scores, and Rick Kranitz goes out to the mound to talk to his pitcher.
Well, Smitty and I talked about it yesterday with 2 strikes or 2 outs, putting the ball in play. And that's one thing Hernandez has been doing. The big man, so Sullivan's coming around scoring. How about that, though? Hernandez is 7 for his last 7.
Incredible.
4 for 4 yesterday. 1 for 1 his last at bat. The first game, the doubleheader, and today, of course, bunt single and an RBI single there.
Pete Buchanan talked about his confidence, and Andy, you could talk about this too. I mean, when a young player gets confidence, it adds to his overall game. He feels like he belongs out there in the fields.
No question about that, which is an important element, which tells you that math isn't the answer to everything in this game. So
right.
You do need to consider everything.
That's a foul ball off the foot of Maikel Franco. I was asking you about Pat Gillick. You've known him for a long time. What's this going to be like to be around him for the next several months, do you think?
I think there was a book that talked about the 25 greatest general managers of all time, and he ranked 2 next to Branch Rickey. So I think that tells you what you really need to know. I've known Pat over different times with different clubs. Back to my Minnesota days when he was in Toronto. He has a great eye for the game, a great feel for the game, and his record speaks for itself. And if you just track his career, really, with the exception of the Toronto being an expansion franchise, the success he's had, whether it be in Seattle or here in Philadelphia and Toronto, has been, unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think the book called him number 2.
Well, no balls and 2 strikes to Maikel Franco, who grounded out his first time up.
It's hard for a GM. When was the last GM that got in the Hall of Fame?
Boy, that's a great question. It is hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking ball and a called strike 3. Well, Andy, I'm sure this is not our last conversation, but we really want to welcome you to the Philadelphia Phillies family, and thank you for joining us.
I sure appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Andy MacPhail, our guest up here in the booth. The Phils tack on 2 more. They lead it 4-1 as we go to the top of the 3rd.